My name is Eleanor Voss, and at 72 years old, I was carried out of the only home I had left by my own son, while my grandchildren watched from the window. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were trash day, and I remember thinking, in the strange, useless way the mind clings to small details during catastrophe, that I had forgotten to bring the bins in from the curb. That was the thought running through my head as my son Marcus stood in the doorway of the guest room I'd lived in for the past 3 years, arms crossed, telling me it was time. Time for what? I asked him. Time to figure something else out, Mom, he said. Denise and I talked about it. This isn't working anymore. Denise was upstairs. I could hear the floorboard creak the way it always did when she stood at the top of the staircase, listening, letting him do the part she didn't have the stomach for herself. I want to tell you how I got there, to that guest room, to that Tuesday, because it didn't happen the way you'd think. Nobody screamed. Nobody threw anything. It was quieter than that. It was 3 years of quiet, actually, building toward one loud afternoon. 3 years earlier, I had a house of my own. A small blue Craftsman on Linden Street with a porch swing my late husband, Richard, built the summer before he died. I had a garden. I had my church group on Thursdays. I had a life that was modest, but it was mine, every square inch of it, paid off, paid for, earned. Then Marcus called one evening, his voice doing that careful thing it does when he wants something. He and Denise were struggling. The restaurant he'd sunk his savings into was bleeding money faster than they could plug the leaks. They were behind on the mortgage for their house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that Denise had insisted they buy 2 years prior, the kind of house that photographs well, but doesn't forgive a missed payment. We just need help getting through this rough patch, Mom, he said. A loan. We'll pay you back, I promise. You know we're good for it. I did know that. Or I thought I did. That's the thing about raising a child, about loving someone for 41 years. You extend them a kind of credit that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with faith. I sold the Craftsman. I want you to understand what that meant. I sold Richard's porch swing house, the one with his handwriting still on the inside of the closet door where he'd marked our daughter's height every birthday, and I gave Marcus and Denise $184,000 to save their home. You'll always have a place with us, Denise told me, hugging me in their driveway the day the check cleared. This is your home too now, Eleanor. I moved into the guest room. I brought 4 boxes. That's all that fit. Once you subtract a lifetime and account for someone else's furniture already claiming the walls. For the first year, it was fine. I helped with the grandchildren, watched them after school, made dinner most nights, so Denise didn't have to. I kept to myself. I paid for groceries when I could, slipped Marcus cash for utilities when he mentioned being short, never made a show of it. I thought I was building something. A home inside their home. A place that would hold. But you learn things slowly, living in someone else's house, if you're paying attention. You learn where you're allowed to sit and where you're not, without anyone saying it out loud. You learn that when Denise's mother visits, you're expected to be somewhere else. You learn that our house is a phrase that gets used at dinner parties, and you are never mentioned as the reason there still is one. By the second year, Denise had stopped saying good morning. Small thing. I noticed it the way you notice a clock that stopped ticking, not right away, but eventually in the silence where the sound used to be. By the 3rd year, I heard her on the phone with her sister in the kitchen, not realizing I was on the back porch with the window cracked. I don't know how much longer I can do this, she was saying. It's like living with a permanent house guest. My mother-in-law, in my house, judging everything I do. Her house. Not the house I had saved from foreclosure with a check that still had Richard's last name printed above mine. I didn't say anything. I went back inside, made a cup of tea, and sat with it. That's what I did with most things by then. I sat with them. And then came the Tuesday. Marcus told me it was time to figure something else out. He said Denise needed her space back. He said maybe a senior community would be good for me, somewhere with people my own age, somewhere with activities. He said all of this while avoiding my eyes, the way he used to when he was 8 years old and had broken something he didn't want to confess to. I asked him one question before I went upstairs to pack my 4 boxes back up. Marcus. I said, do you know whose name is on this house? Marcus blinked at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't recognize. What? Whose name is on this house, Marcus? The Colonial. The one you and Denise have been so worried about losing. Whose name is on the deed? Mine and Denise's, obviously. What kind of question is that? I looked at him for a long moment. He had Richard's chin, I noticed, the way he always did when he was uncomfortable and trying not to show it. Richard used to jut his chin out exactly like that whenever he was about to admit he was wrong about something, right before he actually admitted it. Marcus never got that far. He never had to. Nobody had ever made him. I want you to go check, I said. Tonight, if you can. Ask your lender. Ask the title company. Ask whoever holds the paperwork on that refinance you did 2 years ago, the one Denise pushed for, the one that pulled equity out to redo the kitchen. His jaw tightened. Mom, I don't have time for whatever this is. Just please, let's not make this harder than it has to be. I went upstairs. I packed my 4 boxes in 11 minutes, which is a number I remember because I counted the minutes the way you count contractions when you're waiting for something inevitable to arrive. I didn't cry. I want to be honest with you about that because I think we're taught that grief and humiliation are supposed to look a certain way, tears and trembling and a raised voice. Mine looked like folding cardigans very neatly and placing them in a box that used to hold a microwave. My granddaughter, Sophie, was 9. She stood in the hallway and watched me carry the second box down the stairs. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me the way children look at things they don't have the vocabulary for yet, but will remember perfectly for the rest of their lives. I set the box down and hugged her, and I told her that Grandma loved her very much, and that none of this was because of anything she did. Denise stood at the bottom of the stairs with her arms crossed, the same posture Marcus had used in the guest room doorway an hour earlier. I wondered, not for the first time, whether he'd learned that from her, or whether they'd simply found each other because they were already the same shape. I know this feels sudden, Denise said, in the voice she used for customer service calls, patient and hollow. But Marcus and I need to focus on our family right now. Just us. It's not personal, Eleanor. It's not personal. I have come to believe that 4 words have never done more damage in the history of families than those 4 words, spoken by people who are about to do something deeply, deliberately personal. I didn't argue with her. I had learned over 3 years in that guest room that arguing with Denise was like arguing with a closed door. You could knock as politely or as loudly as you wanted. The door didn't care. It was built not to open. My son carried my boxes to my car without a word. He didn't offer to help me find a place to stay. He didn't ask where I would sleep that night. He set the last box in my trunk, closed it, and stood there in the driveway with his hands in his pockets, looking at everything except me. "You'll figure something out, Mom," he said. "You always do." I got in the car. I drove 3 blocks and parked in the lot of the CVS on Route 9 because I needed somewhere to sit that wasn't moving, and I needed somewhere that wasn't a house with my name missing from it. I sat there until the streetlights came on. Then I opened the glove compartment, where I keep a small accordion folder of documents I never throw away, birth certificates, Richard's death certificate, insurance policies, the kind of things you carry, because you learn the hard way that paper outlives promises. And near the back, folded into quarters the way it had been for 2 years, was a document I had never mentioned to Marcus. Never mentioned to Denise. Never mentioned to anyone, actually, except the woman at the title company who'd processed it and my attorney, Harold Denning, who had drawn it up at my request and told me, more than once, that I was under no obligation to disclose it to my son. 2 years ago, when Marcus and Denise refinanced the Colonial to redo the kitchen, they needed a cosigner. Their credit wasn't strong enough on its own, not after the restaurant losses, not after the missed payments during the rough patch I'd already bailed them out of once. They came to me, not with gratitude, with a favor, framed the way favors always were in that house, as though I owed them the privilege of being asked. I signed, but I didn't just co-sign the loan. I had Harold structure it so that my name went onto the title as well, not as an afterthought, not as a formality buried in fine print Marcus never read, but as a full owner of record. Equal standing. My name, right there beside his and Denise's, on the deed to the house they had just thrown me out of.
I sat in that CVS parking lot and I laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that surprises you because it arrives from somewhere sadness usually lives. Whose name is on this house? I had asked him. He still didn't know the answer. I didn't call Marcus that night. I didn't call anyone. I checked into a Best Western off Route 9, the kind of place with a paper strip across the toilet lid and a Bible in the nightstand drawer. And I lay on top of the comforter in my clothes and stared at the water stain on the ceiling until I fell asleep. In the morning I called Harold. Harold Denning had been my attorney since before Richard died. A careful man who wore reading glasses on a chain and never once, in 15 years, rushed me through a decision. When I told him what had happened, the guest room, the boxes, the 4 words, "It's not personal," he was quiet for a moment. "Eleanor," he said, "do you understand what you actually own right now?" "Tell me anyway," I said. "I want to hear it out loud." He walked me through it slowly, the way he always did, as if he knew I needed the words to land one at a time instead of all at once. When Marcus and Denise refinanced 2 years ago, the new loan had required a co-signer with stronger credit and sufficient equity to secure it. I had qualified, but Harold, at my request, hadn't structured me in as a co-signer only. He'd structured me in as a co-owner, added to the deed with full rights, not a silent guarantor tucked into the paperwork, but an actual name on the title equal to theirs. "Why did I ask for that, Harold?" I said. "I genuinely don't remember thinking it through that carefully at the time." "Because I recommended it," he said. "I told you, if you're putting your name and your credit behind a debt that size, you protect yourself. You don't hand over collateral for free." I remember you hesitated. You said you trusted your son. I did trust my son. I know you did. There was a particular kind of grief in that phone call that I hadn't expected, grief not for the house, not even entirely for Marcus, but for the version of myself who had trusted so completely that she'd needed her own lawyer to insist on protecting her from the people she loved most. Harold told me my options. As a co-owner, I had a legal right to occupy the property. I could not simply be removed from a home I held title to, not by Marcus, not by Denise, not without a formal legal process that would require a court, and would require them to explain, under oath if necessary, why they tried to push out a woman who owned half the roof over their heads. I could also force a sale. If Marcus and Denise refused to buy out my share, or refused to acknowledge it, I could petition for what Harold called partition, a legal process that would compel the sale of the entire property and split the proceeds according to ownership. "You'd get half," Harold said. "Possibly more, depending on how the court weighs your financial contributions versus theirs. You put in the initial capital that saved them from foreclosure. You co-signed the refinance. On paper, Eleanor, you are not a guest in that family's story. You are half the reason there's a house standing at all." I sat in that motel room with the phone against my ear and I thought about Sophie's face in the hallway, the way she'd watched me carry boxes down the stairs without understanding why. I thought about Richard's chin on Marcus's face in that doorway. I thought about the porch swing on Linden Street, sold to save a house I would never again be welcome inside. "I don't want to destroy them, Harold," I said. "I just don't want to disappear." "Then don't," he said. "Let's send the letter." By Thursday, a letter went out from Harold's office, formal, precise, unemotional in the way legal documents are built to be. It informed Marcus and Denise Voss that Eleanor Voss, as a titled co-owner of the property at 214 Ashgrove Lane, was exercising her legal right to occupy the residence, and that any attempt to bar her entry, change the locks, or otherwise interfere with that right would be treated as a violation subject to court action. It further noted that, absent a resolution acceptable to all parties, Mrs. Voss's attorney had been authorized to file a petition for partition, which would compel the sale of the property. I found out later from Sophie, of all people, who called me from Denise's old cell phone because she'd memorized my number and wanted to know where I'd gone, that the letter arrived on a Thursday afternoon while Denise was hosting her book club in the living room. Marcus signed for it at the door. Sophie told me her mother's face went the color of the inside of a shell. I didn't gloat. I want you to understand that because I know how this sounds, an old woman sitting in a motel room while lawyers do the talking, and maybe there's a part of that story that looks like triumph from the outside. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like finally, for the first time in 3 years, being taken seriously enough to be afraid of. My phone rang 40 minutes after Sophie's call. Marcus's name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Mom," he said, and his voice had a crack in it I hadn't heard since he was 17 and calling from a police station after a fender bender he was too scared to tell his father about. "Mom, what is this? What is this letter?" "It's the truth, Marcus," I said. Finally, in writing. We sat across from each other 3 days later, not in the Colonial, and not in a lawyer's conference room, but at the small diner on Route 9 where Marcus used to order chocolate chip pancakes every Sunday when he was small enough to need a booster seat. He looked exhausted. Denise wasn't with him, and I noticed that, the way I'd noticed everything else those past few weeks, filing it away without comment. I talked to a lawyer, he said, before I'd even taken my coat off. He said you're right. He said you could force us to sell. He said if it went to court you'd probably win. I don't want to go to court, Marcus. Then what do you want? His voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment he looked less like a 43-year-old man defending his marriage and more like the boy who used to climb into bed beside me during thunderstorms, certain that nothing could reach him as long as I was in the room. I thought about that question for a long time before I answered it, longer than the silence probably felt comfortable to him. I want you to understand what you did, I said. Not what Denise did. What you did. She's your wife and I understand loyalty, I raised you to have it. But you were the one who stood in that doorway. You were the one who carried my boxes to the car and told me I'd figure something out, like I was a stray you were releasing back into the wild instead of your mother. You didn't have to agree with her. You chose to. He didn't argue. That surprised me more than anything else in those 3 weeks. He sat there, turning his coffee cup slowly on its saucer, and he let the accusation land without flinching away from it, which was, I think, the first honest thing he'd done since that Tuesday. I was scared, he finally said. The restaurant's still bleeding money. Denise has been miserable. I thought if I could just, I don't know, simplify things, give her the space she said she needed, it would fix something. I told myself it wasn't really about you. I told myself you'd understand because you always understand. You always have. That's not understanding, Marcus. That's just what it looks like when someone stops fighting. He was quiet again. Outside the window, a school bus rolled past, and I thought of Sophie, and of the box of keychains I never got to make her, and of a beach I'd never taken anyone to because that wasn't this story, but the shape of the loss felt familiar anyway. Loss has a shape. It doesn't much matter which family wears it. Here is what I decided, and I want to tell you plainly because I think there's a version of this story people expect, where the wronged mother takes the house, sells it out from under them, and drives off with a suitcase full of vindication. That isn't what happened, and I don't think that's what justice looks like, not really, not for people who are still underneath everything your blood. I did not force the sale. Instead, Harold and I restructured the ownership. I kept my name on the deed, my legal share intact, not as a weapon anymore, but as a floor beneath me that could never again be pulled away without my consent. Marcus and Denise would buy out a portion of my equity over the next 5 years, at a fair valuation Harold and their attorney agreed on, structured as payments I would actually receive, not promises whispered across a kitchen table. And I would have a standing legal right, in writing notarized unambiguous, to a place in that house whenever I chose to use it. Not the guest room tucked away and easily forgotten. A guaranteed presence. A name that could never again be quietly erased from a family photo. A holiday, a deed. Denise did not come to that agreement easily. I heard secondhand that there were arguments that lasted late into several nights. But I hadn't built my life waiting for Denise's comfort, and I wasn't about to start needing it now. Marcus called me the week the paperwork was finalized. Sophie had asked him apparently whether Grandma was coming back, and he hadn't known what to tell her. Tell her yes, I said. Tell her Grandma's coming back for Thanksgiving. And tell her I'm bringing pie. I want to leave you with this. For 3 years I believed love meant making myself smaller, quieter, easier to overlook, because I thought that was the price of staying welcome in my own family. I sold a house with my husband's handwriting on the closet door because I thought sacrifice was the same thing as belonging. It isn't, I learned at 72 years old, sitting in a CVS parking lot with a folded document in my glove compartment, that you can love people with your whole heart and still refuse to disappear for them. Those two things were never supposed to be in conflict. Nobody ever should have made me believe they were. If you're sitting somewhere tonight feeling like a guest in a life you built, I hope you remember what I didn't for far too long. Check the paperwork. Check whose name is really on the house. And never, ever let anyone convince you that the price of being loved is making yourself invisible. If this story meant something to you, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. And if you believe every mother deserves to be seen, Not just useful. Subscribe to Hidden Reckoning Stories, because there are more of us out there than you think, and every one of our stories deserves to be told.